The Grimoire of the Vacancy, Pseudology Codex. Codex Prohibitum, Titia Editio. Being a complete treatise upon the art and corruption of pseudology. The reader is advised that prolonged engagement with the material contained herein has, in documented cases, produced involuntary lacunae in the reader's immediate vicinity. The Collegium accepts no responsibility for ontological damage. You were warned. II Preface. What you hold is not a book in any safe sense of that word. A book is a container for preserved thought, it sits between being read and being closed, dormant. This text is neither. These pages were assembled from the collected field notes of 7 Collegium surveyors, 3 of whom no longer qualify as referable persons, not dead, you understand, merely unresolvable, and from the private manuscripts of 2 practitioners who consented to documentation in exchange for what they called, the last chance at a permanent record. We do not know if either of them still exists. We do not know what permanence means for them now. The doctrine of pseudology, known alternately as the vacancy, the art of unmaking, void speech, or in the oldest of the recovered texts, simply and terrifyingly as the silence beneath words, has been observed in practice for as long as civilization has kept records of catastrophic structural failure in the observable world. What we once attributed to divine punishment, to geological event, to mass hysteria, we now understand to be the symptom of a metaphysical wound, a location where the fundamental agreement between reality and its own contents was violated and could not recover. We did not discover pseudology. We were diagnosed with it. The practice was already ancient when the first surveyor walked into a region the locals called the unmouthed place, a valley where no echo returned, where one's own footsteps sounded half-complete, where the surveyor noted in what remains of her field book, the ground is present but does not fully commit to being ground. She measured. She documented. She told no one, for 7 years, because she believed she had lost her mind. Only when a second surveyor arrived at a separate location and described the same conditions, the half-presence, the terminated sounds, the architecture of absence, did the Collegium accept that the landscape itself was producing the phenomenon rather than the observer. This text is our attempt to formalize what we have witnessed. It is neither endorsement nor instruction. It is autopsy. It is the document we produce when something dies in a way that has not been died before, so that those who come after us may at least know the shape of the wound before they fall into it. Read carefully. Read truthfully. The pages have been tested. Their proximity to falsehood produces a measurable response in the paper itself. The remaining editors, Collegium of Structural Truths written in the year of the 7th unraveling, season of long silence. 1. The ontology of being. In this cosmology, existence is not composed of matter, nor energy, nor the will of gods, nor the accumulated weight of time. It is composed of concordant statements, a total, self-reinforcing declaration that what is, is. Every object, organism, and physical law persists because it is continuously, silently, and absolutely affirmed by the structure of reality itself. A stone is not a stone because it is hard and dense and grey. It is a stone because the universe has agreed, without exception and without end, that this arrangement of particles in this location constitutes a stone, and this agreement is load-bearing in ways that cannot be overstated. Truth, in this framework, is not moral. It is not the opposite of a lie in any ethical sense. Truth is structural. It is the integrity of the building. It is the reason the floor does not become the ceiling, the reason a hand raised in the morning is still attached in the afternoon, the reason fire burns in a consistent and predictable direction. The universe does not know these things are true in any cognitive sense, it is these things being true. Existence and concordance are, for all practical purposes, synonyms. The stone does not believe it is a stone. The stone is the universe's unanimous agreement on the proposition of stone-ness, held so perfectly and so continuously that no gap can form between the statement and the thing. Surveyor Marrett, First Field Notes, recovered from the unmouthed place. From this cosmological premise, the entire horror of pseudology flows with the inevitability of water into a wound. If truth is structural, then a lie is an ontological incompatibility. Not merely an error, not merely a misrepresentation, a statement that cannot, by its nature, be integrated into the total equation of being. The universe must respond. The universe has only 2 responses, correction or amputation. In the presence of a sufficiently coherent and committed falsehood, correction fails. And so the universe amputates the site of contradiction. What remains after amputation is not emptiness in the way we ordinarily understand emptiness. Ordinary emptiness is still a place, a coordinate, a location in the fabric of space-time, waiting patiently for content. What the universe leaves behind when it removes a contradiction is something more terrible, a coordinate that no longer agrees to exist. Not a vacancy in a room, but a vacancy in the concept of room. This is the lacuna. This is the engine of all pseudology. This is the wound through which the practitioners draw their terrible power, not by filling the hole, but by directing what is pulled into it. This space previously contained a diagram of the concordance architecture. It no longer does. Plate I, Micro-Lacuna Formation. Surveyor Aldrich, Field Station 9. Do not examine directly. The scholars of the Collegium spent some time debating whether the lacuna is nothing or something. The debate was resolved, unhelpfully but accurately, by the conclusion that it is the place where that distinction no longer applies. The lacuna is not nothing. It is the refusal of the question. It is reality performing the amputation and then refusing to acknowledge that the surgery occurred, because acknowledgement would itself require a valid ontological coordinate, which no longer exists. This is the foundational horror of pseudology, not that it destroys, but that it destroys in a way that cannot be witnessed. A fire leaves ash. A flood leaves mud. A lacuna leaves the persistent, unanswerable question of what was once there, and then removes even the memory that the question was valid. 2. The mechanics of the tear. A lie generates what the Collegium classifies as the friction of contradiction, the grinding contact between what is asserted and what is. This is not metaphorical friction. It is a measurable ontological event, observable in its local effects even by individuals with no training in structural truth analysis. Instruments of sufficiently fine calibration, specifically the Collegium's resonance bridges, which measure agreement density in the local environment, register a contradiction event as a sharp descending curve followed by an irreversible baseline shift. The baseline does not return. The scale and nature of the lie determine the geometry of the lacuna that results. The Collegium has established the following graduated taxonomy after 17 years of field observation. The first grade, casual falsehood. A social untruth: I was never here, I did not notice, that does not concern me. These produce what the Collegium terms a micro-lacuna, an almost imperceptible thinning of presence in the immediate vicinity. Surfaces near the speaker temporarily lose granularity, edges soften, objects briefly forget their purpose without ceasing to exist. A chair may still support weight, but the sensation of sitting becomes uncertain. One feels seated, but the chair does not fully assert that one is. This condition resolves within hours unless the casual falsehood is repeated in the same location, in which case the micro-lacunae compound. Compounding is the primary danger of casual falsehood. Each repetition does not merely deepen the existing lacuna, it widens the radius of interrogation, the zone within which the universe is attempting to verify a contradicted truth. Over years, a site of habitual casual falsehood develops what surveyors call an ambient doubt, a persistent, low-level disruption in which nothing is entirely wrong, but nothing is entirely reliable. Buildings in such areas settle strangely. Children raise their struggle with declarative certainty. The very grammar of inhabitants begins to shift toward the conditional. The second grade, direct falsehood. A deliberate, coherent assertion of an objective untruth: this stone is water, there was no wound, I have never spoken to this person. These produce localized collapse. The object or event referenced does not transform, it partially ceases. Sections of the referenced entity vanish not into darkness, but into a missing coordinate. The remaining structure behaves as though amputated from logic. A stone declared to be water does not become water, its surface develops zones of ontological hesitation, areas where neither stoneness nor waterness can assert itself, which manifest as regions the eye refuses to resolve and the hand refuses to classify. Direct falsehood targeting a person: you were never born, you do not possess that memory, is among the most personal applications of the second grade. The targeted individual begins to experience what clinicians call identity interrogation. The universe is checking their existential credentials and finding the documentation incomplete. They do not cease to exist, but they exist less persuasively. Other people become uncertain of their presence without being able to articulate why. The third grade, great deception. A falsehood of vast scope, directed at geography, history, or collective reality. This city does not exist, that battle never occurred, the river has always run north. These initiate what the Collegium classifies as structural contradiction, in which reality attempts reconciliation across a wide field and fails catastrophically. The failure is not sudden, it progresses through several stages. Stage 1, interrogation. The local environment begins actively checking itself. Landmarks seem subtly misaligned with memory. Maps fail to match the territory, not because the maps are wrong, but because the territory is reconsidering. Stage 2, negotiation. Contradictory states begin to coexist. A building may be simultaneously present and absent, observable from one angle and visually absent from another. Local time becomes discontinuous, witnesses report events out of sequence without being aware of the disruption. Stage 3, excision. Entire districts develop permanent void gaps, regions where causality halts and events fail to resolve into outcomes. Objects placed in these regions do not fall, do not stay, do not move, they are suspended in the failure of physics to decide what applies. In documented cases, void gaps have persisted for centuries. The city of is the most extensively documented case. We do not name it here, because naming it constitutes a direct affirmation of its existence, which our field surveyors advise against pending structural stabilization. On the morning of the fourth day, I walked into what my map recorded as the market district. The street was present, the cobblestones were present, the sky above was present. But the buildings, and I must record this as carefully as I can, the buildings were undecided. They were not ruins, they were not gone, they were in the process of failing to finish being buildings. As though an argument about their architecture had never been resolved. I could see a doorway at one end of what might have been a square, and I walked toward it, and when I arrived, there was no building attached to the doorway. There was only doorway. I did not go through it. Field Record 7, Surveyor Bricks, recovered from his personal effects. The tear is not explosive. It is surgical. The universe removes the contradiction by removing the place where it cannot decide what is true. These removals persist because the contradiction was never resolved, only excised. The excision is, in itself, a kind of answer. The universe says I cannot determine what is true here, and so it removes the here. 3. Manipulation of the void. Practitioners, called void tongues in common parlance, and fabulers, unmouthers, structuralists of inversion, or simply the absent-willed in various regional traditions, do not control energy. They orchestrate absence. This distinction is more than semantic. A mage who controls energy must generate, store, and expend it. The fundamental transaction involves gain and loss in measurable terms. A void tongue operates outside this ledger entirely. They generate nothing. They spend nothing. They exploit the universe's desperate, futile attempt to reconcile what has been broken, and they steer that attempt toward their desired outcome. The mechanism is the gravity of absence, not attraction in the conventional sense, but a demand for resolution. A lacuna is, at its core, an open question. The universe has removed the site of contradiction, but it has not resolved the contradiction itself. The question persists, and like any open question, it exerts a pull on the nearest available answer. Nearby truths, objects, identities, physical laws, are drawn toward the lacuna as reality attempts to patch the inconsistency. The void tongue's art lies entirely in shaping the boundary conditions of this gravitational pull through the careful layering of additional falsehoods, creating a sculpted funnel that directs which truths are consumed and in what order. The foundational technique, directed contradiction. By uttering a precise falsehood about a specific aspect of a specific target, the void tongue creates a lacuna whose open question directly interrogates that target. The target's relationship with the questioned property begins to fail to agree with itself as reality pulls it toward the lacuna in its attempted resolution. Example, a void tongue declares, your body has no continuity. The resulting lacuna does not strike like force. It does not tear or crush. Instead, the target's physical coherence is interrogated by reality itself. The body begins to fail to agree with itself, segments lose relational certainty between themselves, the left hand becoming unsure of its position relative to the right arm, the bones uncertain of their attachment to the flesh. These incoherences are drawn toward the nearest lacuna, not because the lacuna is pulling them, but because they are, ontologically speaking, broken promises, and the universe routes broken promises toward the site of failure. The effect reads, to an outside observer, like a form of dissolution. But it is more precise than dissolution. It is a targeted interrogation of self-reference. The body does not fall apart, it becomes unable to confirm that it was ever together. Advanced technique, lacuna shaping. Skilled void tongues develop the ability to construct complex lacunae through compound falsehood, multiple lies layered in rapid sequence, each specifying a different boundary condition for the void's gravitational pull. This technique, called void sculpting or null architectures, allows for effects of great specificity. This wall is not stone. Stone does not exist in this location. This location has no structural purpose. 3 layered lies, each narrowing the lacuna's interrogation until only the precise ontological properties sustaining the wall are consumed. The wall does not explode, it stops being a wall. It stops being material. It stops occupying the location. In that sequence, precisely, with no collateral damage to the floor, the ceiling, or the air, because those were not addressed in the statement, and the lacuna's hunger was directed elsewhere. The most sophisticated void tongue craft approaches something that can only be described as ontological surgery, the removal of specific properties from specific entities, leaving the remainder intact. Documented cases include the removal of a specific memory from an individual. You did not experience that event, without affecting any adjacent recollection. The memory is not suppressed, it does not exist. The neural pathways that held it remain, pointing at a lacuna the individual cannot perceive or describe. Power comes from proximity. The closer one stands to absence, the more one can steer the collapse, redirecting what is erased and what remains. But absence does not obey. It only accepts better contradictions. Attributed to the void tongue known as the unmouth of Delvair. The danger of proximity, void drift. Standing near an active lacuna is not harmless for the practitioner who created it. The gravity of absence makes no distinction between the truths of targets and the truths of the void tongue. The practitioner's own ontological coherence is also subject to the pull. This is why void tongues develop elaborate spatial disciplines, precise distances from active lacunae, movement patterns that keep them in the boundary condition of the void's funnel rather than in the funnel itself. Inexperienced practitioners frequently fall into what the collegium terms void drift, a condition in which the practitioner's proximity to their own lacuna causes unintended self-interrogation. The practitioner told a lie about the wall, but stood too close, and the void began asking questions about the practitioner instead. Early void drift produces the characteristic disorientation of all near-lacuna experience, the metaphysical vertigo, the sensory failures. Advanced void drift produces something more catastrophic: the practitioner's own lies begin to consume them before they can direct the hunger elsewhere. This is, field surveyors note, how the majority of documented void tongue deaths actually occur. Not at the hands of enemies. Not through overextension. Through misjudged proximity to their own work. For the hierarchy of deception. Not all lies are equal. Their potency as instruments of pseudology depends on ontological leverage, how deeply the falsehood intersects with foundational truths. A lie about the color of a hat intersects with a truth of minimal structural significance. A lie about the continuity of a person's existence intersects with one of the most deeply load-bearing truths in the local ontological structure. The hierarchy below represents the collegium's best current taxonomy, acknowledging that it remains incomplete and that practitioners of sufficient skill have demonstrated abilities that suggest the taxonomy's upper bounds have not yet been found. Grade 1 self-deception. The safest and most insidious form. By asserting falsehoods about one's own internal state, I do not feel pain, I am not aging, I have not been injured, the practitioner induces internal lacunae within their own body. Tissue forgets damage. Nerve signals that would carry pain lose their claim to delivery. Cellular time partially releases its hold on the practitioner's biological processes. This is the entry point for most practitioners, because it requires no outward assertion and leaves no externally observable lacuna. It is also the form most likely to establish the habit of self-erasure that ultimately produces the hollowed. The practitioner becomes accustomed to lying to themselves about themselves, which, over time, reduces the number of truths they can still claim about their own existence. Documented self-deceptions include the suppression of injury recognition practiced by certain warrior scholars who would otherwise be incapacitated, the partial suspension of hunger and thirst signals, the delay of fatigue acknowledgement, and, in two exceptionally documented cases, the assertion, "I am not the age I appear to be," which produced a partial but measurable deceleration of the practitioner's cellular death rate at the cost of progressive loss of temporal self-reference. Grade 2 relational lies. Lies about interactions between entities: he cannot see me, this blade cannot cut, we have never met. These create conditional voids, gaps that manifest only within the context of a specific relational truth. A blade may pass through flesh without effect not because the blade is dulled or the flesh is hardened, but because the event of cutting cannot resolve. The universe attempts to record the encounter and finds that the encounter does not qualify as an encounter, because the qualifying truth has been removed. Relational lies are the foundation of the void tongue's most practical combat applications. They are also among the most temporary, as the conditional nature of the void means it destabilizes when the condition changes. If the lie was that a specific person could not see the practitioner, the lacuna dissolves the moment that specific relational truth becomes irrelevant, e.g., when the person leaves or dies. Grade 3 material falsehoods. Lies about the nature of physical objects: this iron is air, this wood has no weight, this water does not wet. These produce direct ontological erosion of the target material's defining properties. Skilled practitioners use them to erase barriers, neutralize threats, or create zones of partial existence in which the physical laws governing a substance have been suspended through targeted contradiction. The most extreme material falsehoods: this structure does not support itself, this bridge has no load-bearing capacity, have been used to bring down architectural features of considerable scale. The collapse of the Veran span, long attributed to engineering failure, was subsequently reclassified by the Collegium as a probable Grade 3 event based on the pattern of residual lacunae found in the surviving structural members. The members had not broken, they had simply stopped agreeing to bear weight. Grade 4 identity dissolution. Lies directed at the ontological identity of a person: you do not exist, you have no name, you have never been a person. These are among the most ethically significant applications of pseudology and among the most horrifying in their effects. The target does not die, they become ontologically contested. Their existence continues, but it is no longer fully affirmed by the surrounding reality. Targets a Grade 4 application report a progressive loss of social recognition, not because people become hostile, but because attention becomes unable to settle on them. The eye moves past. The name fails to arrive in conversation. Letters addressed to them are redirected without being obviously intercepted. In terminal cases, the target becomes functionally indistinguishable from a holode, without having practiced pseudology themselves, a victim, not a practitioner. Grade 5 Historical rejection. Lies about what has already occurred: this battle never happened, that city was never built, the treaty was not signed. These are the most structurally dangerous lies available to an individual practitioner, because they induce temporal lacunae, regions where cause and effect have become detached. Survivors of events subject to historical rejection exhibit discontinuous memory, physical anomalies inconsistent with their documented history, and profound difficulty forming new long-term memories, not because of psychological trauma, but because the causal chain that connects their past to their present has been partially severed. They exist in a kind of ontological free fall, unmoored from the sequence that produced them. The Collegium's most urgent warning regarding Grade 5 application is this: the temporal lacunae produced do not remain static. They expand. The contradiction between the asserted past and the actual past does not resolve, it propagates backward and forward through the timeline of the affected region, consuming increasing amounts of causal structure. In 3 documented cases, regions of historical rejection have continued expanding a century after the practitioner's death. Grade 6 Mass delusion. When a lie is believed collectively, by hundreds, thousands, or more, it gains distributed reinforcement. The false statement is simultaneously held as true by multiple minds, each of which contributes their own ontological weight to the falsehood. This creates a lacuna of unprecedented structural ambiguity. The universe is now being told, by a significant portion of its conscious inhabitants, that a truth is false. The collective weight of human conviction is, in this system, not metaphorical, it has measurable ontological force. Mass delusion allows entire landscapes to be rewritten, not by replacing reality, but by forcing it to continuously fail in the same way, stabilized by the constant reinforcement of collective belief. These regions become chronic contradictions, maintained in a state of permanent structural failure that, paradoxically, becomes their most stable feature. The failure is what holds them together. Regions of long-standing mass delusion develop their own internal consistency, a second-order reality built entirely from the architecture of a lie, which can persist for generations as long as the collective belief is maintained. The most disturbing implication of Grade 6, which the Collegium does not publish in its general distribution materials, is this: we have no way to verify that we are not ourselves living in a region of mass delusion. The tools we would use to make that verification are themselves subject to the same structural foundations we would be attempting to assess. The question cannot be asked from the inside. Grade 7 The sincere lie. The apex and the terror. This is not a grade of scale or scope, it is a grade of epistemological structure. The sincere lie is a falsehood that the speaker genuinely believes to be true. It is not deception in the ordinary sense, it is the perfect alignment of false assertion and sincere conviction. The universe possesses no defense against the sincere lie. Every other form of pseudology creates a friction of contradiction that the universe can at least locate, the site of the grinding contact between what is and what is said. But the sincere lie produces a falsehood that carries the full ontological weight of truth, because the speaker's conviction is genuine. The friction is absent. The universe cannot find the seam to amputate. And so the lacuna forms not at a localized point, but distributed throughout the speaker's entire field of presence. Wherever they go, whatever they assert, the universe is being told a falsehood with the full authority of truth. Practitioners who achieve Grade 7 status, typically through progressive self-deception that has advanced to the point where they genuinely cannot distinguish their lies from their true beliefs, become the most catastrophic walking lacunae ever documented. They do not intend to unmake the world. They simply are the unmaking, and the world retreats from their certainty like water from a fire that does not know it is burning. 5. The price of the unmaking. A human being persists because they are a coherent narrative, a stable accumulation of truths, continuously reasserted by the body, the memory, the social context, and the physical world in concert. You are the sum of all the true things that can be said about you: your location, your history, your physical dimensions, your relationships, your intentions. Remove enough of these truths, and you do not simply diminish, you become structurally insufficient to support yourself. Every lie told by a void tongue erodes this coherence. The mechanism is straightforward in principle and devastating in practice. Each lacuna created by the practitioner is a site at which a truth was removed from the universe's total concordance. The practitioner created the lie, the practitioner's existence remains the anchor point for the contradiction, and the gravity of absence, in its ceaseless attempt at resolution, does not distinguish between the practitioner's truths and anyone else's. It pulls at the practitioner, too. It simply pulls more slowly, because the practitioner has directed the primary gravity elsewhere. The deterioration follows a documented progression. Early stages, the sensory failures. The first symptoms are perceptual. Colors become questionable, not blind, but uncertain. The practitioner perceives red, but cannot assert with confidence that the perception is tracking accurately to the underlying truth of the red object. Sounds lose their spatial certainty, voices arrive without clear directionality. The practitioner begins to notice, often with academic detachment at this stage, that their senses are hedging, reporting perceptions with something less than the full conviction of previous experience. Memory develops gaps unlike ordinary forgetting. Ordinary forgetting is the degradation of a stored record, the record was there and has faded. The gaps produced by early pseudology use are absences where the record refuses to confirm it was ever made. The practitioner does not remember forgetting, they simply find themselves unable to assert whether a thing occurred. This is the first perceptible sign of identity shear beginning. Intermediate stages, identity shear. Identity shear is the collegium's term for the progressive fragmentation of the practitioner's self-referential coherence. The practitioner begins to struggle with assertions of the form, I am. Not philosophically, ontologically. Parts of the self become unreferenced, properties that have lost their attachment to the central identity structure because the lies told have interrogated and eroded the truths that supported them. Physical discontinuities begin to manifest at this stage. Fingers that are occasionally absent, not amputated but simply not present for a moment, and then present again, with no gap in the practitioner's awareness of them. A heartbeat that occasionally fails to occur without the practitioner ceasing to be alive. A reflection that lags, slightly, as though the mirror is receiving the image from a slightly different moment than the observer is standing in. These discontinuities are not painful. This is among the most disturbing clinical observations. The body does not register the loss of its own coherence as damage, because the very mechanism that would register damage, the integrity of physical self-reference, is what is failing. Advanced state, the hollowed. A hollowed is not undead. They have not transformed into something else. They are ontologically insufficient, a person-shaped set of truths too sparse to fully constitute a person, persisting through the structural inertia of what they once were rather than through the active maintenance of coherent existence. The observable characteristics of a hollowed have been documented with some difficulty, as the documentation itself is subject to the hollowed's proximity effects. The inconsistent shadow. The hollowed's shadow does not track consistently with the light source. It is present, but its geometry suggests a slightly different body than the one casting it, as though the shadow is sampling from a version of the hollowed that no longer fully exists. The attention failure. Observers in the presence of a hollowed consistently struggle to maintain focused awareness of them. The eye is pulled away. Sentences about the hollowed trail into uncertainty mid-utterance, the speaker abruptly unable to supply the next word. Written records about a hollowed develop lacunae, literal blank spaces in the text where words were presumably written but no longer resolve into legible content. Contagious contradiction. The hollowed speech generates micro-lacunae even when truthful, because their existence no longer fully qualifies as a valid ontological statement. They can say true things and have them land with the weight of falsehoods, not because they are lying but because the speaker's ontological status has been so compromised that their assertions no longer carry the universe's endorsement. Truth spoken by a hollowed is treated by reality as contested. I have now spent 6 days in direct observation of Subject 12, who identifies himself as Fabler and presents as a human male of middle years, though my instruments refuse to confirm the age assessment and my notes from days 1 through 3 have partially failed to retain content. He is polite. He is coherent in conversation. He makes tea and offers it with evident social care. And yet I cannot, when I leave the room and return, be certain that the person I am returning to is the same person I left. Not because he changes, but because the thread connecting my current perception of him to my memory of him seems to pass through a lacuna. He is present in this moment. He was present in the last. But the between time has been eaten. Clinical notes, Surveyor Physician Aldra, Day 6. Days 7 through 11 not recovered. Terminal state, the unreferable. At terminal stages, the individual becomes a walking lacuna, a human-shaped absence that reality has not yet fully processed. The question of their existence is still nominally open, which is what keeps them ambulatory. They are, in the most precise possible sense, a contradiction the universe has not yet finished amputating. Observation of terminal cases becomes progressively more difficult as the observer's own ontological coherence begins to be drawn into the interrogation field of the subject's presence. Collegium protocol requires that observers of terminal stage hollowed are relieved after no more than 2 hours and subjected to full concordance testing before returning to active duty. The end, when it comes, is not death. There is no body. There is no grave. There is no ash or blood or final breath. There is simply a moment, typically noticed hours or days later, when the people who knew the practitioner find that they cannot recall the practitioner clearly, and then cannot recall them at all, and then find themselves unable to confirm that the practitioner was ever a valid subject of recollection. The practitioner is not destroyed. They are no longer referable. The gap in the universe where they were is indistinguishable from a gap that was always there. No corpse remains. No memory persists without distortion. No record survives in intact form. The practitioner achieves, in the end, the precise condition they spent their career manufacturing for others. 6. The sinister aesthetic. The presence of pseudology is marked not by spectacle, but by subtraction. This is perhaps the quality most consistently underreported in second-hand accounts of lacuna proximity, because the human apparatus for recording experience is calibrated toward presence, not absence. We notice what arrives. We struggle to take inventory of what has been removed, particularly when the removal includes some of the mechanisms by which we take inventory. What follows is the most complete phenomenological account the Collegium has been able to assemble, drawn from the reports of observers who survived close-range lacuna proximity and retained sufficient coherence to provide testimony. The visual silence. Light does not dim near a rift. This is the crucial misunderstanding of almost all popular accounts. The darkness one might expect, the shadow, the dimming, the sense of something blocking illumination, none of this occurs. Instead, light fails to arrive. Surfaces near the rift's boundary appear as incomplete renderings, objects whose textures have not loaded, whose depth has been partially revoked, whose visual identity is present but abbreviated. The mind attempts to complete the perception and finds the additional information simply not there, not hidden, not obscured, but absent from the data stream. The rift itself is the visual silence, the absolute absence of detail where the lacuna resides. It is not a black hole, not a darkness, not a void in any visually describable sense. It is the refusal of perception itself. The mind attempts to look at it and fails in a specific way, not the failure of being blinded, but the failure of having nothing to process. The visual cortex receives no input from the rift's location. It is not like looking at a wall, it is like looking in a direction in which space has declined to provide visual information. The eye skips over it without being aware of skipping. The gap in the field of vision is noticed only obliquely, in the way one notices a hole in a text by counting the words that should be there. Multiple observers stationed at different angles to the same rift have produced drawings of what they saw. No two drawings agree on the shape of the visual silence. The shape appears to be specific to each observer, or, more accurately, the visual silence is not a shape at all, and each observer is perceiving the absence in the only shape their particular visual processing can manufacture for a thing that has no shape. The acoustic failure. Sound collapses inward near a lacuna. This is not silence in the ordinary sense. Ordinary silence is still a state of the acoustic environment, still air at its most undisturbed. The acoustic environment near a rift is missing. Sound that enters the proximity of the rift proceeds normally until it reaches the boundary condition, at which point it simply fails to continue. Not muffled, not absorbed, ceased. The note arrives and then the note is no longer a note. Its future was voided. Words spoken near a lacuna lose their endings. The first syllables arrive. The concluding phonemes do not, because the future in which those phonemes would complete has been partially voided by the rift's proximity. Speakers near rifts develop a characteristic truncated cadence, stopping mid-word not from choice but from a failure of acoustic time, the duration in which the ending would sound has been consumed. This effect persists in recorded documents. Field notes written in close rift proximity frequently exhibit words that begin normally and then end in nothing, the ink itself ceasing as though the hand that held the pen lost confidence in the proposition of the word's completion. The thermal ambiguity. Temperature becomes irrelevant in the rift's proximity. This is not a cooling or a warming, those would still be thermal events, still be statements about the behavior of matter. The rift produces, instead, a zone in which heat and cold lose their claim to propagate. They require continuity to move through space, they require a chain of adjacent truths about adjacent particles. Near the rift, that chain is interrupted. The thermal state of any given point becomes a local matter, disconnected from its neighbors. Observers describe the sensation not as cold or heat but as thermal isolation, each part of the body reporting its own temperature with no reference to any other part, producing a profound and nauseating discontinuity of self-perception. The metaphysical vertigo. The most comprehensive and least classifiable symptom of rift proximity is what the Collegium terms metaphysical vertigo, a profound disorientation not of space, but of certainty. The observer does not feel that the ground is unreliable in a physical sense, they feel that the ground is undecided. The ground is not going to give way, it is in the process of considering whether to exist. This produces a specific form of cognitive paralysis that is qualitatively distinct from ordinary fear or disorientation. The observer is not afraid. They are, rather, stripped of the foundational assumption that makes fear meaningful, the assumption that there is a situation that can be assessed and responded to. The vertigo is the experience of perceiving the machinery that holds experience together beginning to hesitate, and having no framework for processing that perception because the framework itself is what is hesitating. Long-term exposure to metaphysical vertigo, beyond the 30 to 60 minutes that most observers can tolerate before cognitive collapse, produces permanent changes in the survivor's relationship to certainty. Survivors report an inability to make confident assertions, not because they are uncertain of facts, but because the act of assertion itself feels structurally precarious, as though every statement might be the one that dares. Several have abandoned speech entirely, communicating only through written forms, and then abandoned writing for the same reason. Several of these individuals remain in collegium care. They are well. They are simply no longer confident that saying so is safe. Plate 7, the visual silence at Station 4. Illustration not included by request of the illustrator, who declined to look at their own work again. All subsequent illustrators declined the commission. 7. The void tongues. The common assumption, that void tongues are sociopaths, pathological liars, or individuals constitutionally indifferent to truth, is not supported by the clinical record. Of the 43 practitioners whose psychological profiles the Collegium has been able to assemble, the distribution across personality types is not significantly different from the general population. What distinguishes them is not a pre-existing relationship with deception. It is a pre-existing relationship with precision. Void tongues are, uniformly, individuals with an unusually developed sensitivity to the exact content of statements. They notice the difference between, "I was there" and "I was approximately there." They notice the structure of assertions, the load-bearing elements of claims, the specific words that do the ontological work of a sentence. This sensitivity, which might in other circumstances produce a philosopher or a logician, instead produces, when combined with the discovery of pseudology's mechanics, a practitioner with the most essential skill of the art, the ability to formulate a false statement with precisely the right shape to interrogate precisely the right truth. Typology of known practitioners. The fabular is the most common practitioner type, someone who discovered the art through storytelling, specifically through the emotional investment in narratives known to be false. The professional storyteller, the playwright, the liturgical speaker who has begun to question what they recite. Their lies are often beautiful. Their lacunae tend toward the aesthetic, they frequently manifest as zones in which reality has the quality of an unfinished draft rather than of a fully absent thing. They are among the most socially integrated practitioners, which makes them among the most dangerous in terms of undetected influence. The void tongue proper is a practitioner who has consciously studied the art and developed deliberate technique. They treat pseudology as a discipline and approach it with something approaching academic rigor. Their lacunae are precisely shaped. Their personal degradation is typically the most gradual, because they maintain disciplined spatial protocols and limit their use of self-deception. They also tend to be the most isolated, having recognized the social danger of their own proximity. The unmouth is the designation given to practitioners who have crossed into identity sheer but continue to function. They are frequently unaware of the degree of their degradation, which is itself a symptom of grade 1 self-deception compounding with the progressive erosion of their self-referential capacity. They are difficult to interact with, not because they are hostile but because their presence produces ambient ontological stress in those around them. They are the most likely to produce collateral lacunae through unintended assertion, as their control over which truths they are interrogating becomes unreliable. The holloed is classified not as a practitioner but as an outcome. They retain no deliberate use of the art. They are the art, in its final expression, a walking application of pseudology, applied to themselves, until nothing remained that could be truthfully described. On the question of motive. The Collegium is often asked, why would anyone pursue this art, given the documented cost? The question deserves a serious answer, which is that the art offers something which no other known discipline provides, the ability to edit the foundational layer of reality. Not to influence reality through physics, not to alter probability through mathematical manipulation, not to change minds through argument, but to reach beneath all of those and change the terms under which reality itself operates. A void tongue who declares that a wall is not blowing the wall apart. They are removing the wall from the category of things the universe recognizes as walls, at which point the wall's own structural maintenance terminates, because there is no longer a definition for the wall to live up to. This is, to certain minds, worth any price. It is the closest a mortal being can come to the universe's own creative authority, not to make, but to unmake the making. The tragedy, and it is a tragedy, is that the price of this authority is precisely what it feels like to be fully real, to be a coherent person in a coherent world, continuous with one's own past, recognizable to one's own future self. The void tongue purchases reality editing at the cost of their own reality. Most of them know this. Most of them continue. 8. The counter arts. A discipline has emerged, in direct response to the documented existence of pseudology, which the Collegium calls structural affirmation, the deliberate, precise, and continuous assertion of truths with the intent of reinforcing the ontological coherence of the local environment. Where pseudology corrodes, structural affirmation consolidates. Where the void tongue removes truths, the structural affirmationist layers them, increasing the agreement density of a region until the fabric is thick enough to resist contradiction. The practitioners of this counter-discipline are called concordance keepers, and they operate on a principle that is, in its essence, the mirror image of the void tongue's art. They do not add anything to reality. They simply say what is, with extraordinary precision, at extraordinary volume, in extraordinary quantity. A concordance keeper walking through a region of ambient doubt performs what they call a recitation, a continuous, meticulous verbal inventory of everything that is true about the immediate environment. The stone is stone. The path is path. The sky is sky. Each assertion reinforces the concordant structure of the local reality, increasing its resistance to the friction of contradiction. I speak the wall. I speak the floor. I speak the morning and the particular quality of this morning's light on this particular floor. I do not describe. I affirm. There is a difference that the universe recognizes even if you do not. Concordance keeper theoris, personal correspondence. The limitations of structural affirmation are significant. It is reactive, not preventive. A concordance keeper cannot pre-fill a region with such excess structural truth that a sufficiently powerful lie will not find purchase. They can only repair, and repair is slower than damage. A grade 3 deception can produce in seconds what a team of concordance keepers would require weeks to restore, assuming the region has not developed chronic contradiction, in which case restoration is considered effectively impossible. Concordance keepers are also subject to their own degradation pathway, which is the mirror image of the hollowed's condition. Where the void tongue erodes by speaking too many false things, the concordance keeper risks what the collegium calls tautological collapse, the condition of having asserted so many truths so precisely and so continuously that the practitioner becomes unable to separate their own assertions from their own existence. They begin to experience themselves as a function of their assertions rather than as the being doing the asserting. In advanced cases, if they stop speaking, even to sleep, they experience a form of existential panic, because they have come to rely on their own recitation to maintain their personal coherence. They have become dependent on affirming themselves in order to continue to be themselves. This condition is considered by the collegium to be, philosophically, the most disturbing outcome of either discipline. The void tongue loses truth. The concordance keeper cannot stop producing it. Both, in their extremity, arrive at an existence organized entirely around the relationship between assertion and being, one by destroying it, one by never being able to put it down. The witnesses. A third category exists, neither practitioners of the art nor its counter-art, the witnesses. These are individuals who have developed, through birth or through prolonged rift proximity, a sensitivity to the structural state of the local reality. They do not create lacunae, they do not repair them. They perceive them. In the presence of a lie told with sufficient ontological force, a witness experiences the friction of contradiction as a sensory event, not pain, exactly, but a physical wrongness, a pressure in the narrative of their experience that cannot be located in any specific sensory organ because it is not, precisely, a sensory experience. It is the perception of a truth being removed from the universe's total concordance. Witnesses are invaluable to the collegium. They are also, uniformly, individuals living with a condition that removes most of the pleasure from social life, as ordinary conversation is saturated with casual falsehood of sufficient intensity to produce constant low-level sensory disruption. Most witnesses the collegium has interviewed describe social gatherings as exhausting in a way they cannot explain to non-witnesses. Several have withdrawn from society entirely. Several live as hermits in regions of unusually dense and stable concordance, deep forests, ancient stonework, places where truth has been quietly accumulating for a very long time without interruption. They are, by their own account, the most honest people alive, not because they are virtuous but because the alternative hurts. 9 Testimonies of the Void. The following testimonies were gathered by collegium surveyors over a period of 40 years. They are reproduced as nearly verbatim as the original records allow, accounting for lacunae in the source documents. Where text is missing, we have indicated the gap. We have not attempted to fill it. The first time I understood what I had done, really understood it, not as a theoretical proposition but as a fact about the room I was standing in, was when I told my partner that I had been faithful, and I watched her eyes. Not her reaction. Her eyes. The pupils contracted at the wrong moment. A fraction of a second too early. As though the light in the room had changed before the conversation did. I looked at the candle on the table and the candle was incomplete. The flame was present but it stopped halfway up. The upper portion of the flame was not dark. It was simply not there. I understood then that the room had heard me. And that the room could not agree. Anonymous. Subsequent location unknown. We found the body, or what we took to be the body, in the third room. I say we took it to be the body because my partner and I subsequently could not agree on whether there was anything in the third room at all. My notes say, body, male, middle years, unusual posture. Her notes say, empty room, stone floor, something wrong with the corner nearest the window. We have since compared our notes 11 times. They continue to disagree. We were in the same room at the same time. One of our notes is false. We do not know which one. We do not know if we can trust the one that is true, given that it was produced by a person who was in the presence of something that may have been hollowed in the final stage. I am including this testimony despite my uncertainty about its accuracy. I would not normally do so. But uncertainty, I am learning, is part of the record. Surveyor Pell, Field Notes, Year 14 of Service. I know you cannot quite see me. I have watched this happen now for, I am not sure how long. The time is one of the first things that goes. I can tell you that I remember a time when people looked at me the way you would look at a person. Directly, without the sideways quality. I do not miss it as much as you might expect, because missing it would require a continuity with the self who had it, and that continuity is, gap in source document. I think the correct word is optional. That is what I have become. A self that the universe has made optional. It is still considering whether to include me. I am providing commentary on the consideration. I find that this is all I have left that is, with confidence, mine, the capacity to notice what is happening and to name it. I name it. It does not save me. But it is a true thing, and true things are all I have left to give. Subject 12. Not located in subsequent follow-up visits. Room confirmed empty. I was a storyteller. I want you to understand that I believed, genuinely believed, that fiction was harmless because it announced itself as fiction. The audience knows the story is a story. The lie is consensual. And for a long time I was correct. And the world was fine. But then I began to perform pieces that I had not written as performance. Pieces I had written to believe. Speeches I had composed because I could not face the truth they were designed to replace. And the audience, they didn't know. They thought it was a story. And I think I stopped knowing too. I don't know when the performance became the truth I was trying to speak over. I don't know when the gap opened. I know that it opened. I can feel where it is. Inside me, like a room in a house I grew up in that I know is there but that I can no longer find the door to. The room is empty. I put the door somewhere and the door is gone. I put something in the room and the room ate it and now the room is gone too. I tell you this as honestly as I can. I hope you can tell. Fabula Irvine. Concordance testing subsequently placed her at intermediate stage identity shear. She declined further contact with the Collegium. 10 Glossarium. The following terms are used throughout this codex and are defined here for the reader's reference. Some terms are the Collegium's formal designations, others are field terminology or practitioner argot, included because they have become sufficiently established in the literature to warrant documentation. Field diamond. Ambient doubt. The persistent, low-level ontological disruption produced by long-term habitual casual falsehood in a fixed location. Buildings and persons in regions of ambient doubt exhibit subtle but measurable unreliability without presenting clear evidence of lacuna formation. Concordant statement. Any assertion that is fully consistent with the total structure of reality's self-affirmation. The fundamental unit of ontological existence in this system's cosmology. Concordance keeper. A practitioner of structural affirmation, one who maintains reality's agreement density through precise, continuous truthful assertion. The counter to void tongue practice. Fabula. A pseudology practitioner who developed the art through immersive storytelling or performance, often without initially understanding the ontological mechanics of their practice. Friction of contradiction. The ontological event produced when a false assertion contacts the total structure of reality's concordance. The grinding contact between what is said and what is. When the friction is sufficiently intense and the contradiction sufficiently coherent, the failure cascade begins. Grade 1-7. The Collegium's formal taxonomy of lie magic potency, organized by ontological leverage. Grade 1, self-deception, through Grade 7, the sincere lie. See Chapter the 4th. Gravity of absence. The demand for resolution exerted by an open lacuna on the surrounding ontological structure. Not physical attraction, rather, the pull of an unresolved question on the nearest available truths that might constitute an answer. The primary mechanism of void tongue power. Hollowed, an advanced stage pseudology practitioner whose ontological self-coherence has degraded below the threshold required for full existence. Not dead, ontologically insufficient. Characterized by attention failure in observers, inconsistent shadow, and the conversion of truthful speech into ontologically contested assertions. Identity shear. The intermediate stage of practitioner degradation, the progressive failure of self-referential coherence. The practitioner begins to struggle with the foundational assertion, I am. Lacuna. The primary product of pseudology, a site from which reality has amputated the contradiction it could not reconcile. Not an emptiness but an absence of the possibility of location. The source of the void tongue's power and the engine of their eventual dissolution. Metaphysical vertigo. The primary cognitive symptom of rift proximity, a disorientation not of space but of certainty. The experience of perceiving the universe's foundational assumptions beginning to hesitate. Null architectures. The advanced technique of lacuna shaping through compound layered falsehood, the construction of precisely bounded voids through sequential false assertion. Also called void sculpting. Ontological leverage. The degree to which a given lie intersects with fundamental load-bearing truths. A lie about hat color has minimal leverage, a lie about a person's continuity of existence has maximal leverage. Pseudology, the vacancy. The formal and common names for the discipline of lie magic, the study and practice of reality warping through falsehood. Also called the art of unmaking, void speech, and, in the oldest texts, the silence beneath words. Recitation. The primary technique of concordance keepers, a continuous, meticulous verbal inventory of present truths, intended to reinforce the agreement density of the local ontological environment. Sincere lie, the Grade 7 application, a falsehood that the speaker genuinely believes. The most catastrophic form of pseudology, against which the universe has no defense, as the friction of contradiction cannot locate the seam of falsehood. Tautological collapse. The degradation pathway of concordance keepers, the condition of having become dependent on continuous truthful assertion for one's own existential coherence. The mirror image of the hollowed condition. Unmouth. A void tongue who has entered identity sheer but continues to function, typically unaware of their own degree of degradation. Characterized by unreliable lacuna control and ambient ontological stress in proximity. Visual silence. The visual manifestation of a rift, not darkness, but the refusal of perception itself at the lacuna's location. The eye receives no data from the rift's position and skips over it without registering the skip. Void gap. A large-scale persistent lacuna produced by grade 3 or higher application, a region where causality has halted and events fail to resolve into outcomes. Void drift. The condition in which a void tongue's proximity to their own lacunae causes unintended self-interrogation, the practitioner begins to be consumed by the gravity of absence they themselves generated. The most common cause of void tongue fatality. Witness. An individual with sensory perception of ontological stress events, one who experiences the friction of contradiction as a physical sensation. Neither practitioner nor counter-practitioner, a passive recipient of the art's consequences. Finis codicis, here the grimoire of the vacancy ends. What comes after has not been decided. The final page. What it contained is no longer verifiable. End.